The first sound was not the crash, but the silence before it, a silence thick enough to feel. The ocean, once calm, had drawn back from the Monterey shoreline, leaving boats tilted like dying fish. Frank Wilson stood on his boat's deck, staring at the impossible, a dark wall of water rising across the horizon. He had seen storms, tempests, and rogue waves, but never this. Somewhere beneath that churning mass of water was the town he'd lived in all his life. And somewhere behind him, a German shepherd stood trembling, his fur slick with seawater, eyes fixed not on the wave, but on the shore it was about to devour. When the ocean roared forward, everything that mattered became motion, the boat lifting, the air tearing, and a man's life being rewritten in a single breath. Hours earlier, before the sea began its slow betrayal, the night had been eerily still. Frank's boat drifted in open water under a fading amber sky when the sound came. A howl carried across the waves, faint yet deliberate. The noise didn't belong to wind or gulls. It was a living plea wrapped in salt and distance. The old fisherman turned toward it, scanning the black horizon, until he saw it. A shape fighting the current, too purposeful to be debris. The ocean reflected streaks of dying light around it, as if the world itself wanted to reveal this survivor. What Frank didn't know was that this desperate creature had already crossed miles of indifferent sea, driven not by instinct, but by memory, an animal mission written in loyalty and loss. The storm hadn't begun yet, but the story already had.
When Frank hauled the drenched shepherd onto the deck, he felt the weight of something more than an animal. It was the weight of survival. The dog's breathing rasped like an engine that had burned through its last drop of hope. Yet even in exhaustion, his gaze remained locked toward the distant horizon, unblinking, alert, almost commanding. His collar light blinked red, then steadied into rhythm, a faint pulse that synced with the waves. Salt water dripped from his fur, carrying flecks of black oil. Frank recognized the smell, industrial, foreign, a stain on nature's breath. Somewhere beyond the horizon, the source of this dog's journey waited, and whatever it wasn't finished. Above them, lightning flickered silently in a distant sky. The air shifted. The ocean, calm for too long, seemed to inhale. Somewhere deep below, the world was waking. The collar wasn't just ornamental, it was engineered. As Frank wiped away salt, faint numbers glowed across the small embedded screen. Coordinates. They pulsed every few seconds, as if the sea itself had a heartbeat. The readings pointed away from shore, back into deep water, toward the edge of a continental fault line he knew too well. His instincts warned him against following, yet the dog's posture never wavered, its eyes reflecting something more than animal urgency. The old fisherman checked his compass, the numbers repeating like a warning disguised as a whisper. Every instinct said to turn home, but something in the dog's relentless stillness held him there. He had spent years running from the sea's mysteries, and now one had climbed onto his deck, asking to be pursued. Somewhere beyond those coordinates, something waited. Alive or not, it needed to be found.
He followed the signal until the water changed. It went from deep blue to a darker, denser shade, thicker somehow, heavier under the boat. The air carried the metallic taste of electricity. The shepherd, whom Frank had begun calling Max in his thoughts, stood perfectly still, tail stiff, nose lifted. The ocean below them rippled unnaturally, like breath moving under glass. From far beneath, a vibration hummed through the hull, low, rhythmic, deliberate. It wasn't the song of whales. It was mechanical, artificial, and endless. Frank realized he was floating above something vast, something that should have been asleep, but wasn't. The coordinates matched a deep-water ridge known for geothermal activity, but this was different. The silence here wasn't peace. It was pressure, the kind that builds before the world breaks. A pulse of white light erupted across the horizon, then vanished. It wasn't lightning. Its shape was too geometric, its glow too cold. Frank shielded his eyes. For a second, he thought he saw a shipwreck illuminated beneath the waves. But when he blinked, it was gone. The sea settled again into deceptive calm. Max whined softly, tail low, scanning the water as if the light had spoken directly to him. Then the collar blinked again, not red now, but amber, a distress signal changing tone. The ocean rolled once, a gentle, deceptive wave, and beneath it, something massive shifted, disturbing layers of silt that glowed faintly before fading into blackness. Frank had been at sea long enough to know when nature's rhythm had been tampered with. Whatever that flash was, it wasn't natural, and it wasn't over.
Days before this night, another storm had formed without warning, a perfect spiral of clouds building faster than any meteorological model could explain. Dr. Emily Winters had been aboard the research vessel Argo 9 when it struck. She remembered water breaking through the deck, the scream of twisted steel, and the suffocating quiet after impact. She had survived by clinging to debris until exhaustion stole her consciousness. When she awoke, the ocean had changed. Its warmth, its color, even its scent, something deep below had been disturbed. Before the vessel went under, she had recorded seismic readings that made no sense. Thermal spikes, pressure fractures, and an undercurrent vibrating like a heartbeat. She had one chance to preserve that data. She attached the drives to Max's collar, whispered one final command, and sent him into the current. The dog swam toward destiny. Back in the present, Frank's boat drifted over that same fracture line. The sonar screen flickered with ghostly shapes, towers of metal rising from the seafloor, pulsing with faint light. Not shipwrecks, but constructs. The hum he'd heard earlier now resonated through the water like a hidden machine, breathing beneath miles of pressure. Max paced restlessly, ears twitching with each surge of the sound. The coordinates pulsed faster. The ocean, it seemed, was not broken by nature, but engineered by human hands. A tremor passed under the hull, subtle but unmistakable, and a plume of steam erupted from the surface a mile away. Frank gripped the railing as the sea began to boil in patches. Somewhere beneath, a mechanism was waking, something that had slept too long under layers of human denial and scientific arrogance.
The boiling sea spat up fragments of wreckage, panels of composite metal and torn labeling marked with the Argo 9 insignia. Among the debris floated a single waterproof tablet, its cracked screen flashing an intermittent glow. As Frank retrieved it, the faint image of a woman's face appeared through static, a recording looping endlessly. Her expression was calm but urgent, her voice replaced by distorted white noise. Yet her eyes carried recognition, as if she knew who would find her message. Max stared at the screen, tail motionless, gaze fixed. The name on the recording matched the tag embedded in the dog's collar, Dr. Emily Winters. The realization hit Frank like cold wind. The dog wasn't leading him to something, it was leading him back to someone. And the ocean had kept her secret until now. The tablet crackled alive once more, this time with sound. Not words, but fragments of breath, echo, and rushing water. Yet in the midst of the distortion came something recognizable, a low rhythmic beeping, a distress signal embedded within the recording. The sequence matched the one on Max's collar, confirming the origin of both. Frank replayed the sound, layering it over the ocean's ambient hum until the two frequencies aligned perfectly. The ocean itself seemed to echo the pulse, as if the water remembered the pattern. The revelation struck hard. The beacon wasn't calling for rescue, it was warning. The coordinates marked not where she was, but what she had tried to escape. Max sat beside the console, watching the screen's dying light fade, and for the first time Frank understood. This was not a rescue mission, it was a countdown.
As dawn broke, the ocean's skin began to ripple. Long, narrow waves crossed each other like intersecting scars. Beneath them, seismic sensors buried in the ridge transmitted silent alarms to systems that no longer existed. The Argo 9 had been their final guardian. The fault line below Monterey Bay was stirring, stretching after centuries of rest. Max's collar pulsed in sync with the tremors, its glow shifting faster, brighter, almost frantic. Frank could feel the vibration through the deck plates, deep and uneven, like an ancient drumbeat returning. The sea's rhythm was unnatural, mechanical spasms layered over nature's heartbeat. It was then that he realized what Emily had warned in her last transmission. The vent system wasn't passive geothermal activity. It was an unstable machine. Someone had tampered with the foundation of the ocean, and now it was beginning to answer. Under the first rays of dawn, Emily awoke in a hospital bed surrounded by distant alarms and muted voices. She remembered flashes, the ship, the current, the fall. But what woke her now wasn't pain. It was the tremor under the floor, the same pattern she'd felt before the storm, rhythmic and rising. Somewhere, Max was still following her signal, completing what she had started. The rescue crews thought she was delirious when she tried to explain, but the data spoke for her. The readings were accelerating exponentially, far beyond prediction. What had been thermal expansion was now kinetic displacement. The ocean floor was no longer stable, it was breathing, exhaling pressure through fractures miles wide. Emily knew what came next. If the models were right, the first surface wave would hit the coast within a day, and the world still slept.
By late afternoon, Frank's boat drifted closer to shore. The storm clouds gathered again, dark, electric, purposeful. Max stood on the bow, body tense, staring into the surf. The hum beneath the sea intensified until the deck trembled with it. Then, through the haze of rain and light, a flare cut the sky from the distant coastline. Red smoke, a survivor's signal. Frank's instincts took over, steering toward it. When he reached the wreckage, a life raft floated half-submerged, tangled in kelp. Inside lay a woman, pale, exhausted, eyes half open but alive. Emily Winters. Her first breath on his deck was the sound of science meeting salvation. Max pressed against her, whining softly. The circle was closing. The dog had found his way home, and with him came proof that the sea's next act would not be merciful. Emily's waterproof pack, retrieved from the raft, contained her life's work. Within it lay thermal maps, seismic logs, and simulation codes pointing to one horrifying conclusion. Human extraction machinery had destabilized the ridge. What was meant to harvest heat for energy had instead fractured the seabed, converting heat into displacement energy. Every surge of pressure fed into a chain reaction capable of lifting oceans. The first tests had already triggered the storm that sank the Argo 9. Emily had tried to warn them, but they silenced her reports. Now the system was reaching its tipping point. The vent's temperature spikes were no longer oscillations, they were constant surges. Each one carved a larger path for the next. It wasn't a question of if the ocean would rise, but when. And that when was shrinking by the minute.
Nature, when provoked, rarely roars in anger. It whispers first. The sea's whispers came as small, precise vibrations under Frank's hull, like the shivering breath before a scream. The vents below had reached ignition threshold. Superheated gases fractured rock, releasing ancient pockets of pressure trapped for millennia. Columns of vapor broke through the surface like geysers from the underworld. Emily watched the readings climb past every safety limit she'd ever known. The process could no longer be reversed. The ocean was rearranging itself. What humanity had drilled for convenience had become a weapon forged by arrogance. And Max, sensing what instruments could only predict, growled low, a warning older than language. The first visible wave wasn't tall yet, but its pattern told the truth. The sea was pulling back to gather strength. Retaliation had begun. On land, the authorities hesitated. Emily's models were too new, her warnings too catastrophic to believe. Bureaucracy moved slower than tides. Frank listened as her radio transmissions met static and polite dismissal. The coast remained open, tourists unaware of the machine churning beneath them. Every passing hour stole another chance at evacuation. The harbor's stillness mocked urgency. Frank watched fishing boats prepare for another ordinary morning, unaware they were lining themselves along the ocean's target. He'd lived his life trusting the sea's moods, but now he saw betrayal in its stillness. The air itself felt wrong, heavy, metallic, dense with unseen force. When the first tremor hit the dock, no one understood. Only Max reacted, barking at the waves, fur bristling, as if to shout the words humanity refused to hear. It's already too late.
The quake began as a pulse too deep to measure. Beneath the seabed, molten veins shifted through broken rock, colliding in bursts of steam. The ocean floor cracked open in a jagged line, releasing a column of boiling water that raced upward like a living thing. On the surface, the sea convulsed. Fishermen saw their nets rise as if pulled from below, unaware that the rising tide was not wind-driven but earth-born. Frank's compass spun uselessly. The world's magnetic fields trembled, disoriented by the surge. Emily's laptop screamed warning tones she'd never programmed. The pattern confirmed it. The wave chain had initiated. The fault line had become a living artery of force. Max pressed against her leg, trembling, not from fear, but from anticipation. Nature had crossed from warning to punishment, and there was no turning back. Within minutes, the sea began to retreat. Entire coves drained, leaving fish flapping on bare sand. The ocean inhaled with terrifying precision, pulling itself backward to build momentum. Frank knew this pattern. It was the sea's way of gathering its strength before destruction. The horizon darkened into an unnatural wall, stretching across the bay. Birds screamed inland. The harbor bells rang once, then stopped as power lines snapped in sequence. Emily clutched her data drives, the proof of what mankind had unleashed, but there was no one left to warn. The sky dimmed with mist as the ocean curved upward, the line between water and air dissolving. For a moment, the silence returned, the same silence that had started it all. Then the abyss exhaled, and the world remembered how small it really was.
By the time the emergency sirens sounded, they were echoes of a warning already fulfilled. The first wave had hit the outer marinas, flipping boats like toys. Frank drove his vessel inland against the current, searching for survivors as chaos unfolded. The streets below the bluff vanished under foam and debris. Houses became driftwood in seconds. Emily's voice trembled as she transmitted coordinates of safe elevations to anyone still listening. Max stood at the bow, scanning the chaos with unblinking focus. The dog's collar light pulsed through mist and ruin like a heartbeat refusing to die. The sea that had once fed this town now devoured it with surgical precision. The storm above mirrored the one below, a duel of sky and water with no victor, only consequence. Amid the flooding streets, a flicker of movement caught Frank's eye. A small figure stranded on a floating door, clutching a soaked backpack. The child's cries were drowned by the roar of waves. Without hesitation, Frank maneuvered closer,
fighting currents strong enough to tear wood apart. Emily's calculations flashed across her tablet. The next wave would strike within minutes. They had one chance. Max leaped into the water before either of them could react, slicing through debris toward the child. His fur, once golden brown, now shone silver under the ash-gray light. He reached the child, gripping the fabric of the jacket with his teeth, guiding them toward the boat as if retracing his own rescue. When Frank pulled them aboard, the second wave was already forming behind them. The ocean was reclaiming what it had spared.
Max stood trembling but unbroken, his gaze fixed on the horizon, reading vibrations no human could feel. The second wave rose higher than the first, its shadow devouring the morning light. Frank saw it crest and understood that instinct was their only navigation. Max's hackles lifted. He turned his head toward a distant cliff, an unspoken direction etched in his stance. Emily recognized it too. The dog wasn't reacting to fear. He was predicting trajectory. Every cell in his body tuned to a frequency deeper than physics. Frank steered toward where Max pointed, trusting something older than science. Behind them, the sea collapsed into itself with the weight of continents. Ahead, cliffs loomed like salvation carved from chaos. The storm screamed, the ocean obeyed, and the world balanced on the instinct of one dog. They almost made it. The third wave struck not from the front, but from the side, a refraction from the cove wall that twisted the sea into spirals. The boat flipped, metal groaning, glass shattering. Frank plunged into water colder than breath, tumbling through darkness and light. When he surfaced, Emily was clinging to wreckage, calling his name, but sound dissolved in wind. Max was nowhere. The child floated nearby, crying silently, eyes wide with disbelief. Frank swam to them, guiding the debris toward higher drift. For every survivor he pulled close, one more memory sank below. The sea no longer distinguished between guilt and innocence. It only counted motion. When he looked back, the storm had swallowed half the horizon. And still, no sign of the dog. Hope, like breath, grew thin.
Underwater light shimmered like stained glass shattered by gravity. Frank dove again, lungs burning, eyes searching through floating ruins of plastic and wood. Then he saw it. Max, trapped under twisted railing, legs thrashing weakly. The sight ignited something primal. He tore at the wreckage with raw hands until the metal gave way. The dog burst free, bubbles trailing like confessions to the surface. They rose together through layers of silence until air tore them apart with the sound of thunder. When Frank dragged Max onto a fragment of hull, the animal coughed water and lay still, chest trembling. For a moment, the storm's rage dimmed. In that fragile calm, man and beast shared the same breath, the single defiance left to life when the world decides it's time to drown. The largest wave was not the tallest, it was the slowest. It rose with the weight of continents, bending air and light as it gathered momentum. Its face shimmered with the reflections of everything it had already taken: boats, homes, people, histories. Frank, Emily, and Max clung to what remained of the vessel, watching it approach like an ancient god reclaiming its dominion. The horizon tilted, air turned heavy. For an instant, the wave's edge revealed the seafloor miles below, barren and glowing from geothermal light. Then gravity shifted, and the ocean began to fall. The sound was less thunder than the Earth's own exhale, a final breath before silence. The water met them with the force of memory, sweeping the world into itself.
No one remembers the exact moment the sea stopped moving. It was as if the world had been scrubbed clean of sound. When Frank opened his eyes, everything was gray. The sky, the water, the air between. He floated beside fragments of wood and metal, breathing smoke and salt. Emily's body surfaced a few feet away, still alive but motionless. Max, drenched and shivering, pressed against her shoulder. Around them, the ocean had flattened into glass, stretching endless and empty. In the distance, the faint hum that had haunted them was gone. The machine beneath had silenced itself, either destroyed or satisfied. The line between survival and surrender blurred until it no longer mattered. They had become part of the sea's pause, tiny specks inside a living memory, waiting to restart time. When light finally returned, it arrived without warmth. The coastline was gone, replaced by twisted forests of debris stretching inland. Smoke rose from shattered buildings like the sea's breath, still reaching for the sky. Survivors wandered among wreckage, faces coated in salt and disbelief. Frank guided Emily and the rescued child toward higher ground. Max limped beside them, eyes scanning the ruins as if searching for meaning. The air smelled of brine, diesel, and something faintly metallic, the scent of new beginnings born from destruction. The sun hovered low, unsure whether to rise or retreat. Somewhere behind them, the tide whispered against new shorelines, reshaping what humanity had called permanent. The sea had spoken its lesson in full. Balance cannot be taken without consequence.
In the weeks that followed, the ocean's rage faded into myth. News channels called it the Monterey event, reducing catastrophe into digital numbers. But for Frank and Emily, silence carried its own news. They returned daily to the cliffs, staring at a coastline redrawn by force. The child they had saved now lived with distant relatives, another survivor with nightmares older than memory. Max's fur began to gray at the edges, his scar healing but never fading. Each night, he stood by the shore, listening to the water with the patience of an oracle. Frank wondered if animals remember disasters the way humans do, or if they simply forgive faster. Either way, Max never howled again. The ocean, it seemed, had taken that sound for itself. Months later, scientists confirmed what Emily's data had always warned. The undersea drill network had caused the fault shift. The machines, built for extraction, had consumed themselves during the quake. Humanity called it a rare anomaly. Emily called it penance. She rebuilt her research from fragments, not to accuse, but to understand. Frank returned to fishing in quieter waters, his nets smaller, his route shorter. Max remained by his side, calmer now, though his eyes still followed the horizon. The world moved on, as it always does, but for those who had watched the ocean stand upright like a living wall, peace never returned fully. Sometimes, redemption doesn't heal, it simply endures, and in endurance, there is truth.
Years passed before the ocean grew still enough for trust. Children played again near the shore, unaware of how close history had come to erasure. Frank, older now, sailed once more beneath gentle skies, the rhythm of the waves returning to its ancient calm. Emily's reports became part of a global study on ecological fault recovery. Yet every so often, seismic sensors picked up faint tremors beneath the bay, a pulse, a whisper, a reminder. Max, now gray and slow, would lift his head at night when the tide changed, ears twitching as if hearing something familiar. The sea no longer threatened, but it never truly forgot. Its silence was no longer comfort, it was patience, waiting for humanity's next decision. It returns to where it began, a night storm, endless horizon, a dog standing atop a sinking vessel, howling into a void of rain and lightning. But now, that sound is understood. It is not desperation, it is defiance, a vow echoing through every survivor and every drop of water that refused to drown them. The ocean listens and does not respond. In that silence, life restarts. Frank steers through calmer seas. Emily monitors new data from rebuilt sensors. Max rests with his head on the deck, eyes half closed, dreaming of the waves. Somewhere deep below, the hum stirs again, faint but steady, the heartbeat of a world that never truly sleeps. The howl that once called for help now becomes legend, a memory etched into tide and time, reminding mankind that nature always remembers who first betrayed it.